But section 145 of Gesenius is where he tracks verses showing that there are exceptions, where part of the sentence is talking about something in the singular, and then the other part of the sentence referring back to the something in the singular uses the plural instead. Okay, and if you read section 145 of Gesenius, which you can do because the previous video has a link to Gesenius's own book that you can read, if you go back and you look for section 145 and read it, you're going to find out he makes a very long list of the verses that illustrate these exceptions. Okay? Very long list. And when you read the rules that he found in the Bible, you will notice that in every case there is a predicate. It's really important. There is a predicate part of the sentence in which this rule is followed, this change of number and person and gender. It has to be the predicate. All right? In Psalm 12:7, it isn't the predicate. So, section 145 of Gesenius does not apply to Psalm 12:7. That's the first problem. The second problem is, or the rule, in section 145 of Gesenius, is that when the switch occurs, like if I have the protasis, the beginning of the sentence is a singular, but the last clause in the sentence is a predicate clause and is a plural, it's using the plural because it's referring to the items inside the collective of the beginning of the sentence. In other words, Hebrew is always big about hypostasis. It's always God-man with the Hebrew. Okay, so you got always, they pair clauses. They're always pairing things. Okay, it's always parallelism. So you, in a Hebrew sentence, you usually have a first clause and a second clause. The second clause always elaborates on the first one. Okay? So the first clause has something singular. The second clause will have something plural, because the singular thing in the first clause is a collection of, usually individuals. According to Gesenius, it's individuals, it's animals, it's a collection of things. A collection of things. So the second clause will be plural to reference the first clause, which is singular. All right? Well, that's not happening in Psalm 12:7 either, because in Psalm 12:7 you have a plural, and in Psalm 12:6 you have a plural, but it's not the same plural. Psalm 12:6 is talking about words. Psalm 12:7 is talking about us. Why? Because it's using the ending pronoun for us. It would have to be us or him. Okay, but then if it was him, it's not modifying the Hebrew word for words in 12:6, which is a feminine plural imrot. All right? So those are two of the rules in Gesenius section 145. There's a third rule, okay, which has to do with, how do you want to put this? Specifying, it's like there's a parenthesis. Okay, in other words, let's say the first clause in Hebrew said, the world knows. Okay, and then in the second clause it says, they see him. The they is talking back to world, even though it's plural, because when it says the world knows, you know, just the phrase itself tells you it's not the world that's being talked about, it's the inhabitants, plural, of the world, because the world itself is just soil. It's dead. It doesn't know anything. So when it says the world knows, it means the inhabitants of. So it's shorthand. To say the world knows really means the inhabitants of the world know. And so therefore the plural in the second clause is talking to the idea behind the world in the first clause. So it's really an agreement in gender and number, because the inhabitants of is left in ellipsis. Okay? So that's your third that's the third basic rule that he uses in section 145 for the times when a clause in Hebrew, first clause, doesn't have the same gender and number as the second clause in the Hebrew sentence. Excuse me, I'm talking too much. Okay, now here's the fourth thing, and then we'll close. Psalm 12:7 in English is Psalm 12:8 in Hebrew. Psalm 12:8 in Hebrew. Okay? Gesenius has an index at the back of his book of all the Bible verses he references, which show either, he's showing something about the pronunciation of the word, or he's showing something about the grammar rules. Psalm 12:8 is not listed anywhere, because all his index is of the Hebrew, not the English, because he's German. Okay? So he's using the one kind of index that everybody would have in common, which was the Hebrew. Alright? So Psalm 12:8, which is Psalm 12:7 in English, is nowhere referenced in Gesenius. Nowhere. So there's nothing special about it. It doesn't qualify as a nun energetic, and it doesn't qualify as an exception under section 145 about gender and number, or he would have listed it. Now, I mean, you can tell that it doesn't qualify as an exception. You can tell that it's a straightforward sentence just by reading it. But of course, if you're KJVO and you're using a rule book instead of the Hebrew because you can't really read the Hebrew, then you won't know that there's nothing special about 12:7. I mean, there's nothing special grammatically about it. The content itself is extremely important. It's a statement of God's perseverance. That's echoed in, what is it, 2 Timothy? 2 Timothy or 1 Timothy 2, where that psalm, God will never deny us. We might deny him, but he won't deny us. Okay? I will never leave you nor forsake you. That's in the Old Testament. Psalm 12:7 is a statement that God will never leave the Jews. And that's why the second verb in there, titzrenu, which is the verb that is being disputed. Titzrenu means you will guard us, you will preserve us, you will cherish us. It comes from natser in the Hebrew. The vocabulary form of the verb is natser. Titzrenu is the actual word in the verse. Okay, so that's what was being said all along from verse 5 forward. We're oppressed, we're hurt, but you will protect us anyway. That's a common refrain in the Bible. So as you can see, those people who are KJVO, when they really can't read the language, they also can't read the grammar rules of the language very well. And I'm sorry to have to be so technical, and I'm sorry to have to be so critical, but when somebody's attacking the Word of God and claiming that a translation is better than the words God preserved, that's when you fight. Ta-ta.